record.
Wow.
And basically, I'll just very briefly introduce myself. I'm not going to go through the sort of full introduction because there are a couple of other links or videos that are available on YouTube. And you guys are more than welcome to go and view it. Out of your group, Tish, you're more than welcome to share the links as well. And I've got to start off by saying up front that I'm not looking at taking anybody away from any other organization. From a disaster relief CERT or the Community Emergency Response Teams Volunteer Network, being a national organization, we are in actual fact looking at taking on people that are not first responders, are not actively involved in other organizations. And let me explain it to you this way. I'll use you, Tish, as an example. In your household, without knowing the overall circumstances, but you are prepared to get, in your personal capacity, you are prepared to get involved in certain aspects which you are currently doing as part of the Boksburg 911 non-profit company. And I know that for the purposes of this video, I can state that as a legally registered entity. For those that actually watch this video. However, you may be married, you might have teenage children or children over the age of 16, and they could feel left out. And what I mean by that is, in most circumstances, it is the male of the house, the head of the house, who gets involved in, like organizations such as yours, CPFs, etc., etc. They might join other institutions on the government or municipal level as reservists or whatever the case might be. But then the wives and the children feel left out because their husband or father's actually going out on a Friday or Saturday night and doing things. And, this builds up animosity. And I'm looking for those people to come on board and be able to contribute in times of disaster relief and assistance. So let's have a look at my background briefly. I have been involved in emergency management services since the age of 13, funny enough, when I joined an organization called REACT, the Radio Emergency Associated Citizens Teams. And being a teenager and in high school, I had CB radios at home, and I set up an emergency center there, and all of the CBers around us used to call me as a base station, at which point I would phone Joburg Ambulance, Joburg Traffic Department, or SAPS. Breakdown services didn't operate in the way that breakdown services operated today. So we had a couple of guys that we used to make contact with. So I became a controller on that side. However, I progressed from that, and I eventually joined, or at least I should say, I went out and I did first aid training with the South African Red Cross Society, being the general first aid certificate as a starter. And that was brought about by one of our volunteers at REACT, who he in actual fact wanted to become he wanted to become a radio amateur, and I wanted to become, he wanted to become a paramedic, and I wanted to become a radio amateur. However, we both went off and we did the first aid, and needless to say, over the next couple of years, Chris became the radio amateur and I became the paramedic, because I'd worked my way through to emergency medical assistant 1, at which point I was already employed by the South African Red Cross Society, initially as the coordinator of manpower and training, and was responsible for all the Southern Transvaal training of the general public in first aid, as well as the mining certificates that were issued. In addition to that, John and myself, who was the coordinator, we oversaw the 700 odd volunteers that were registered and part of the voluntary aid corps. From that point, I actually left. I got into a couple of other fields. I got into the security industry. I sold my security company. I got into the video industry. I left that and I went back to Red Cross. Funny enough, dropping from 40K a month to 1,600 Rand a month. When I went back to Red Cross, I went back as the operations manager for Southern Transvaal region. And this was all as a result of the lead up to the release of Nelson Mandela in 1990. As a result of that entire move, the ICRC became involved in South Africa, instituted various training programs and other relief and assistance programs, at which point for the next 2 years, I was actually trained by the International Committee of the Red Cross and what was then termed the League of Red Cross Societies, being the second of the 3 legs of the International Red Cross movement. And that training was designed specifically towards disaster relief and assistance and the management of disasters on large scales. That basically gave me the background as to where we are today. I did eventually, after 20 years of volunteer work with the SA Red Cross, I got into the family environment and I broke away from Red Cross. And it was there that I actually did realize firsthand, as I'd witnessed with many, many other volunteers, that family members felt left out, built animosity, and even resulted in divorces in some cases. So I walked away from Red Cross, but I continued to volunteer in my own capacity in and around the western side of Joburg. That went on until the age of 35. Well, I should in actual fact say that went on in the western side of Joburg from the age of 35 through to around about 52 odd, at which point I'd burnt my lungs on a fire rescue and pulled myself off of the road. Well, you can hang up your gloves as many times as you want, and you just never, ever seem to walk away from it. And I spoke to John. I spoke to Stephen. At that time, Stephen had and myself had actually become radio amateurs along with John, and we decided to form initially MCOM Assist CERT, which was a business-based organization. We moved that on to a non-profit company, registered non-profit company and registered public benefit organization with SARS in terms of the Income Tax Act. And last year, 2022, we changed our name from MCOM Assist CERT to Disaster Relief CERT to be a more self-explanatory description of who we are as a non-government organization. And we put ourselves in the NGO aspect purely because of the fact that we follow not only the International Committee of the Red Cross's guidelines on disaster management, but we also, we subscribe to their policies as well. But we also subscribe to World Health Organization, United Nations, UNDRR, UN. Now, just went over the top of my head. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. So all of those aspects come into play, and what we decided to do was to form a non-government organization which will actually target all individuals throughout South Africa who would like to be able to assist in times of a disaster. We need to be clear about that. That means that we are not a first responder organization at all. We do not go out to motor vehicle accidents, welfare checks, or anything else along those lines as a principal objective of disaster relief CERT. Our main goal and objective is in actual fact to prepare volunteers to be able to assist local communities in times of disaster. And we need to follow the definition of disaster as defined, not only internationally, but also as defined through the Disaster Management Act and the various disaster management frameworks that are operational throughout South Africa. And that is, it is an incident whereby the local authorities and all communities are unable to cope of their own accord, and additional assistance is needed and required. So that was the purpose of forming Disaster Relief CERT. Ancillary objectives, of course, now would have to follow the primary objective, the sole and principal object of the non-profit company, which, of course, is to create awareness amongst communities of the potential risks of disasters occurring, but also in order to recruit volunteers and, of course, to facilitate and assist them in their training in order to reach out to local communities. Now, in terms of the Disaster Management Act, there are 3 levels of volunteers. I just briefly want to cover this. And the first one is that there's a unit of volunteers as defined in the volunteer regulations. Now, these are volunteers who sign up directly with a disaster management center. And we need to understand what a disaster management center is. In terms of legislation, the government of South Africa must, in actual fact, set up a national disaster management center. Every province must form, create, and set up a provincial disaster management center. And then all of the municipal entities, each municipality is also by law required to set up a disaster management center on the municipal level. Then the municipal level falls under the province, province will fall under national. And so there's the hierarchy with regards to how disasters, etc., are in actual fact managed, or at least should be managed. And in terms of the regulations, the head of the national center may declare a disaster, as we saw with Minister Zuma, declaring a national disaster for the COVID-19 pandemic. That also gave her the authority and the power in terms of the legislation, in terms of law, in terms of the Disaster Management Act, to actually institute, roll out, and implement various regulations, which would in actual fact, or should have been designed to provide not only government, but the municipal, provincial, and nationals, and the citizens of South Africa, the capabilities to be able to deal with the disaster. So you've got your unit of volunteers. They sign up directly with a municipal entity. They fall directly under that disaster management center. And of course, that disaster management center has full control and authority over what those volunteers do. The second level of volunteers are volunteers that are called general volunteers. Now, general volunteers are the people that do not want to form part of the structured level of the unit of volunteers, and they in actual fact fall under 2 categories. They are your non-government organizations, number one, but they can also be CBOs or community-based organizations. And one needs to understand the concept between the 2 differences. You've got your official NGOs that are registered on various levels. For example, the South African Red Cross Society is a national recognized NGO in the country as a national society, forming part of the International Committee of the Red Cross or the International Red Cross movement as a whole. The South African government is subscribed to the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols to the conventions, and therefore they are the primary organization responsible for disaster relief and management in the country. In addition to that, when you look at the ultimate disaster called war, then of course the Red Cross emblem is also applied to, as we know today, the South African National Defence Force. And there is, in actual fact, the SA Red Cross Act that has been promulgated, giving the Red Cross specific authority and the various departments like the head of the Defence Force and others as to what can and cannot be done with regards to both the protective and the indicative emblem of the Red Cross movement. Other organizations, for example, could be a Gift of the Givers, another one. SARSA used to be Off-Road Rescue Unit. They've changed their name. Canine Search and Rescue, Wilderness Search and Rescue. People like Mountain Club of South Africa is another good entity. All of these organizations, of course, are now the better known NGOs, and of course, Disaster Relief CERT has now entered into that field as well. Then the CBOs, as I said, we need to distinguish between the 2. These are community-based organizations, whether they are formed by non-profit companies, non-profit organizations, and yes, there's a difference between the 2, and each one falls under different acts altogether. But you get organizations that come together. It could be a local knitting club, for argument's sake, that says, look, What we're going to do as part of our teaching people to knit whatever jerseys, whatever the case might be, we will in actual fact build up a stock of 1,000 jerseys that might be able to go out and be provided to communities in times of a disaster. That would be known as your community-based organization. And of course, that organization could follow the proper founding document, form an association, and implement a constitution, or it could just be an agreement, a verbal agreement between various people. Then your third category of volunteer is the most dangerous volunteer. And unfortunately, these are the guys that join all of these WhatsApp groups and they run around and become absolute cowboys. These are the guys that are not only going to get the NGO trained professionals killed in terms of a disaster, but they are also going to be responsible for the death of the community during the times of the disaster. Now, before I give everybody the let me put it to you this way. For those that are watching the video, I'm going to give you the opportunity to shout at me, and I'm going to drink some of my coffee, okay?
No, you're actually touching a subject that I also feel should be spoken about because of those cowboys out there. For real.
No, absolutely. And I say this because of the fact that, I think the people that are watching the video need to understand that I actually got involved with the Red Cross as far back as the 1980s. I have run operations which will scare every single one of you, to put it bluntly, shitless. Not only that, the medical incidents that I've been involved with will do the same thing. I've been involved in all the political violence. I know that a lot of the security, the private security service providers do come under fire in the line of duty, so to speak. Well, in the line of my duty, I've been firebombed, tear gassed. They threatened to overthrow the very first 4x4 rescue vehicle in the country, which was put together by a guy by the name of Chippy Brown and myself at Red Cross. So, yes, I've been there. And why are these guys dangerous? One, because they do not know what not to do. And that is the biggest problem. It's not so much about knowing what you should do at the scene, any scene, as a matter of fact, not just a disaster, but any scene. I mean, whether it be a motor vehicle accident, a welfare call, or just standing by on the side of the road. A lot of people are subjected to various kinds of incidents because they do not know what to do. And of course, when they do not know what to do, they endanger the lives of other people as well. I think a simple explanation of that, and I know it came up on the Boksburg 911 group previously. One of the CPFs, which is something now from a legal perspective needed to be dealt with in a different manner, put out a call for all the first responders to converge on Bree Street, City of Joburg, because there was a massive gas explosion. Well, let me just point it out to you guys this way. That is utter stupidity. Number one, there are things called perils, and perils are things that fall within disaster-related incidents, and not every incident is a disaster, but within your perils, you've got an additional category of perils called cascading events. So what you do is you do one of these stupid calls. All the first responders are to go into Bree Street, and of course you get all your first responders there, and you've got a secondary explosion and you lose half of your first responders. Yeah, sad thing to say. To those of you that are not trained, stay away. Those of you that are trained for certain things, stick to what you're trained to. That's the given line, the bottom line here. And why do I bring this up? Because the purpose of this video is to explain the need for volunteers. Now, as I said, we're not going to look at the first responders, but we've looked at the three levels of three categories in terms of the Disaster Management Act: unit of volunteers, general volunteers, and of course, your spontaneous volunteers. Now, one thing that is quite clear within the Disaster Management Act and the various disaster management frameworks is that every single national disaster management center and the head of the center must, in actual fact, take into account and make use of and definitely promote the growth of the volunteer network. But the general volunteers must, in actual fact, be included. Now, in terms of the Disaster Management Act and the regulations, now take note of this, all general volunteers and all the other NGOs need to also be registered with the Disaster Management Center within which they operate. And there's a legal liability aspect to that. That's point one. But point two, it also provides the head of the national, of the Disaster Management Center, either municipal, provincial, or national level, statistics of what resources they have got available to them at any given time and who they can call upon when they have in actual fact identified the needs of the community following a disaster. So remember, a disaster is something that is a situation or event that the local community and the local authorities are unable to cope with, and they need additional assistance. So, for example, if the city of Ekurhuleni had a massive explosion 10 times the size of the LPG tanker, and all of their services were unable to assist, they could have called upon a city of Joburg to provide resources as well. And that would have been in accordance with the Ekurhuleni Disaster Management Center, who the head of the department could have there and then declared a disaster, which doesn't happen most of the time. It only happens way after the time in order to ensure that the necessary funding is provided for the restructuring and the rebuilding of a disaster in terms of the disaster management cycle. Now, I've used a lot of terminology and phrases and everything else. Why do we need you as a volunteer? Well, as I say, what happens when your local authority cannot cope and assist? I'll give you an example. Using the Boksburg 911 group, there's a lot of security service providers on that group. Each and every single security service provider, in times of a disaster, will be assigned specific tasks. That's right, specific tasks. The first vehicle to arrive at the incident and report back needs to understand that they actually might not be involved in any rescue, any medical, or even scene safety for that matter. Being security, you guys might have to be withdrawn to the perimeter, at which point you are going to secure the disaster scene. Or in terms of the Sierra Act itself, you may be called upon by SAPS to provide security to shopping centers or to places of food or places of water and provide security there. That is why it becomes important that as a spontaneous volunteer, you know what not to do. In other words, security service providers like the general public should not run into an incident because you contaminate a crime scene. And every disaster, like every aircraft accident, like every motor vehicle accident, is in actual fact a crime scene. So one has to, in actual fact, protect the integrity of what we are doing after the fact while we are dealing with the current fact and incident. Then that'll be the security service providers. So now just stop and think, for example, we got a group of first responders who are in actual fact available under ordinary circumstances who are now going to be assigned other tasks. Think about it this way. Now you got less hands to work the disaster. Now you need specialized people. And even, your normal level 1, level 2, level 3, what was known as level 1, 2, and 3 first aiders, you guys need to understand from a medical legal perspective, there are certain things you can do. And then in times of a disaster, there are certain things you cannot do. And what it is that you are going to be able to do or not be able to do will in actual fact be in line with the disaster management framework for your specific municipality or province. And those are the things that need to be known on the first responder side. But outside of that, even the first responders now, there's another line of thought. Your first responders, Your emergency management services, which, by the way, is not emergency medical services, even though EMS is used interchangeably. But emergency management services, in terms of the various acts, is the fire brigade services and the ambulance services of the municipality or of the province. They might not, in actual fact, be able to get into a disaster zone purely because of the damage, not only to roads, buildings collapsing. Let's just take a look at what's happening in Gaza at the moment. Let's have a look at for the war-torn example. But in addition to that, let's have a look at the Turkey earthquake for the natural disaster, because disasters are split into different categories, which are split into different families, perils, cascading events, etc. Many times, Naples is another one that comes to mind. Medical personnel, relief personnel could not get in. Not even the army could get into certain areas during times of a disaster. So who in actual fact is going to have to reach out and deal with that disaster? You, the community members, not you, the first responder, because in all honesty, most of the first responders are probably going to be dead. It's as simple as that. You are the guys that are out on the road. You guys might run out to the incident and, a secondary event that's going to kill you. Now we need to deal with what is left. Who's going to be left in terms of a disaster? It's you, the community. Following the safety first principle, make sure your family is safe. Make sure your family is secure. If it's a family unit that is involved in disaster risk reduction and disaster relief, then of course you can in actual fact reach out and go and assist your own community. And you can assist them in terms of your level of training. You don't always need first aiders, for example, for disaster relief, or firefighters for disaster relief. Okay, not at all. Here's an important aspect: communications. You need people that are able to communicate using two-way radio communications in order to report an incident in their local street, for argument's sake. I keep saying, as a disaster relief CERT volunteer, if you, during times of a disaster, have not lost your life and are able to step outside your front gate and look left and look right, and maybe even walk down to the next intersection and look up, and go to the other intersection and look up, and then report back to your base station or to whoever it is you can make contact with from your two-way radio, your handheld radio, your CERT radio, licensed, etc., and send a message back and say, street so-and-so is not available or accessible coming from this direction, and this same street is not available from that direction. Why is that important? Because having spent many years on ambulance services myself, I know what it's like. You get a call, you run the call, and you get caught in a traffic jam. Or you get to an intersection and it's closed off for whatever reason. Now you can't get through. Now it takes you another 10 or 20 minutes to find an accessible route into the injured and the affected. By then, they are also dead. So what purpose are you serving as a volunteer? Early warning system. You are providing the National Disaster Management Center or a various of the various jocks that are set up throughout our areas today. You can inform your local authorities. Do not use that street. You're not going to get in. Or the only way you're going to get in is you're going to come in with a 4x4. So don't think of bringing in a fire pumper because it ain't going to go nowhere. Don't think of bringing in your ambulance because it ain't going to go nowhere. You as a paramedic, if it means you sit and do nothing while people are injured, then you sit and you do nothing while people are injured until there's an open route for you to get in. Because for all intents and purposes, the other disaster relief CERT volunteers, that's now from the general pool, and your spontaneous volunteers could come together at the bottom of that street. And the general volunteers who are there, and if there are any registered unit of volunteers in that street, you guys might in actual fact be able to, in an hour, take a chainsaw, cut out the trees, remove the rubble and open the road. so that those medical personnel can actually get into the scene. In addition to that, as a disaster relief CERT volunteer, whether you are trained level 1, 2, or 3, you can still reach out to the injured. But you can also do an assessment of the area and report back to the DMC and say, listen, guys, we've got entrapments. We got structural collapses. We got people under the rubble. What are you telling everybody? Hey, don't just send an ambulance. An ambulance is useless in that time. Absolutely useless. You can't send 50 ambos into a scene like that when all of your patients are actually under the rubble. You need to bring in a couple of ambos, maybe 5. Set up your triage center. Set up your staging center. Be ready. All other vehicles, continue with your normal duties or stand on the outside of the disaster. Why? Second earthquake. Take out all your ambulances. But the disaster relief CERT registered volunteers can report back and notify the authorities that, guys, we need urban search and rescue. We need canine search and rescue. We need SARSA. We need high angle rescuers. We might need swift water rescuers, depending on the situation. Look at what's happening. As a disaster relief CERT volunteer, the very first thing you are doing is providing accurate, reliable, and correct information right the way up the structure, that the correct and appropriate assistance is provided to those in need. That's what you as a community are doing. Okay, let's move on then with the second part. I'll edit this breakout. And all right, so we'll start from this point. So basically, by ensuring a trained CERT volunteer, disaster relief CERT volunteer, knows what to do, there's also things that they need to know that they should not do. This is where the get to know what not to do aspect kicks in. For example, as a disaster relief CERT volunteer, you will not be expected to swing between 2 buildings on a shoestring like MacGyver used to do. Because I can assure you, you're going to kill yourself as well. And a dead hero is a no good hero. So there's a lot of things you need to know what not to do. You'd also need to know what your capabilities are and the limits of your capabilities, etc., etc. Now, these are taking things to an extreme. And in this particular instance, up until this point, I've covered a lot of the trauma, a lot of the injury and the death aspect of disasters. However, many other disasters can occur, even where there is no injury to persons, but there may be structural damage and other limitations that kick in. For example, let's say we look at that LPG tanker blast, for argument's sake. That one caused a lot of structural damage at BBH, but it never actually injured anybody to the point where, you know, it made headlines, so to speak. It could have been a lot worse. Could have taken out that entire casualty department, and all those medical personnel could have lost their lives. Even there, in times of a situation such as that, through proper training, an appropriate evacuation zone could have been implemented a lot sooner, or actually could have been implemented, period, because having followed that entire incident, and I know that there's a lot of reports out there and a lot of claims and assumptions and everything else, but I do tend to agree with the likes of Malcolm Midgley, who made several statements that an evacuation zone of 1.8 kilometers should have been required, etc., etc. I've got an additional one to throw in there because of this meeting is directed specifically at the moment to the Boksburg 911 group members, but not the group members per se, the family of the group members. In other words, not the first responders of Boksburg 911. I've got another one to throw in the pot here. And this goes back to training I received almost 35 years ago from a company called Keenan International when I was still with Red Cross. And of course, I was responsible for the the emergency side of an aircraft accident at Jan Smuts Airport, now known as OR Tambo. Yes, I'm giving away my age. I'm 59. What impact does this have on your community? Well, first thing I can tell you now, if you really want to see me pull out the last bit of my hair, not only community, but first responders, SAPS, SID, NDF, security personnel, if you really want me to pull out my hair, run into that incident and start helping. I'm telling you now, that's the last thing you do. Any plane accident, you set up a perimeter and you leave it at that, because I'll tell you one thing, there is only one authority that takes responsibility for an aircraft accident, and that is the Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center. SAPS is not in charge. Metro Police are not in charge, not even disaster management. And I know people are going to say, yeah, but you got to go and save lives. Really? So let's have a look at this. You got a jumbo that comes down, 350 odd souls on board. By the end of the entire recovery process and getting the entire plane sorted out and all the bits and pieces gathered together and moved off to a hangar somewhere for further investigation, we discovered that 350 souls are lost. In other words, they died. And each and every single one of you runs out there, including disaster relief CERT volunteers. You run out there and you run in and you start ripping this out, and you grab something and you're trying to put out a fire here, and you're doing all kinds of stupid things that we do out of necessity. And I use the word stupid deliberately. Because why? Our natural reaction is, man, we got to save that life. But here's what you are forgetting. You are contaminating a crime scene. Number one, you are also changing the dynamics of the overall accident. Do you know that the placement of a 3-inch bolt that is moved or accidentally kicked from point A 1 meter away can lead the civil investigators to a completely different conclusion as to the cause of that plane dropping out of the sky? So let me point this out to you this way. Your plan, your desire, your willingness to save that one life can cost the lives of thousands of others, because the civil investigation of the civil aviation authorities, wherever it is worldwide, will not actually know why that plane fell out of the sky. And that same type of jumbo, that same concept could creep in on 10, 20, 50 other aircraft that are in the air, and they could drop and kill all of those people. So here's my question. Was it advisable to run in at that moment in time? Or should you, as a volunteer, spontaneous volunteer, general volunteer, unit of volunteers, SAPS, SANDF, or private security service personnel, being the main role players involved in day-to-day activities and emergencies? Was it advisable for you to actually run in and do what you did? My answer is no. You've cost the lives of thousands, or the potential cost to thousands of other lives. This is why it's important to know what you can and what you cannot do. So even as a disaster relief CERT volunteer within that area, now, remember I gave you the definition of a disaster, but Granny falling down the stairs, never mind Granny, you yourself falling down the stairs and breaking a leg can be disastrous. It's not a disaster. An aircraft accident is termed an accident by default because it's an accident and it is not necessarily a disaster. However, it is the kind of event that is based on a large scale damage, assessment, or loss of life. So it sits between the two, and for all intents and purposes, can be considered a disaster without it being declared a disaster as such. So all levels of volunteers, all role players, and the fire departments, for example, they do a lot of exercises. The municipal fire departments, what's left of the municipal ambulance services, the provincial ambulance services, SARSA, Canine Search and Rescue, Urban Search and Rescue, all of these guys do regular exercises with the Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center in order to learn what to do and what not to do. They also are taught there is a direct path in, there's a direct path out. There is also the aspect of recording every single move that they undertake, which will be used for the investigation moving forward. So there you are as a first responder. You don't know this. You're not going to be trained at this level. Therefore, you need to know that as a first responder, on the one hand, as a private security service provider on the second hand, even as SAPS, even as SANDF, and in particular, all other volunteers, you need to know what you can and cannot do. Now, as general volunteers and a unit of volunteers, you could be called into that aircraft accident, even if it means you're going to drive a clipboard and pen, or better still, drive a pen over a clipboard and you record every single move that the fire department make on that aircraft. Every single piece of evidence is properly recorded, photographed, videographed, whatever the case might be. That's what you can do as a registered volunteer. There you can, as a registered volunteer, participate in ARCC training and get involved. So I'm just looking at a couple of potential areas. I want to share the screen quickly, and I want to move out of the aircraft type accident, and I also want to move over to other areas of assistance. So just looking at the screen at the moment, I have here level 3 first aid and general medical assistance, basic firefighting. This is what most volunteers think is the only thing that we need to do. No. We need to have proper communications. That is why through MCOM PDY Limited, we supply properly licensed communication capabilities that can be utilized on a community emergency radio network level, which of course will couple into the disaster relief, disaster management, and as a sideline can cover all of your first responder capabilities as well. And don't tell me you got cell phones, because I can tell you what, they're not going to work. They are not working, and it's costing lives. That's for another discussion. Let's move on with why and how you, as an individual, a family member, can in actual fact get involved with disaster relief CERT or the community emergency response team's volunteer network. Communications. Granny, how old are you? 82. Gran, can you see out of your front door? You are still good enough. Then you're not useless. Because I can tell you now, you with a radio, even on the community emergency radio network, you can provide vital information. Even if you got a walker, Gran, you can walk to the gate and you can look up and down the street and report back. Nobody is excluded. If you're 16 years and above and you've got capabilities, that's fine. Gran, you're 82 and all your senses are together, and you can listen to that radio and get a report, and you got a base station that you can actually pick up a radio broadcast from a volunteer that's using a handheld radio and take down and write down their message. Gran, you can pick up that same radio and you can call a base station 30 kilometers away and pass that information on to the disaster management center. You're not useless. You need it. Bottom line, just on communications. Then we can go on and have a look at disaster area damage response and reporting teams. I'll blow that up a little bit bigger for the purpose of the video. Okay, disaster area damage assessment or assessment response and reporting teams. Immediately after you found your family is safe and everything else, as a registered volunteer, you can now go out and start doing and assessment on a very specific level. I tell you what, this is a 60-hour training course of its own accord, taking volunteers from day one, the day that they start their training. They can have a look at risk assessments, hazard risks, hazard vulnerability risks, how to document it, how to get there, know the area, how to send that information to DMC, to include it in the consideration of the overall disaster management framework. Then during a disaster, to go back and have a look to see what aspects of their area have been affected and report back. So all of that there is another requirement. That there is not for people like me, but it's definitely for the younger generation. Then we got the logistical support as well. Okay, so you're 65 years of age, you're retired, and you think that you are useless. Do you have a bakkie? Do you have an SUV? Can you still drive a bus? Do you have a bus license? Code 10 or code 13, whatever it might be, 13 truck, I don't know, they changed all of those. Well, you can be used as well. You can go and collect stock. You can go and collect blankets. You can go and collect people. You can pick people up that have crept out of the rubble and walked to a particular point. You can take them and drive them over to an evacuation center. Yep, you're useful, even at 65. If you're 75 and you can still drive that truck and you've got that energy, I'll take you on board without any problems at all. I'm serious. I'm not joking. Anybody over the age of 16 and not dead can be utilized regardless of your age. One thing I would like to say to the volunteers, if you do have any medical ailments such as emphysema or things like that, then of course you've got to pick a situation or a facet of disaster relief and assistance and fit in an area where you can, and maybe, even if you double up with others. You might sit with that 85-year-old and let her do the radio communications, and you can write down the messages for her. So you see, there's always a need for volunteers. Logistical support, supply of vehicles, trucks, specialized equipment during disaster relief operations. Then there's a lot of you out there that have got the love for animals. Well, animal rescue is another one. There's nothing worse than having dead animals around a disaster area. One, it stinks. Two, it brings all kinds of diseases. So those of you that can cope with that type of trauma, psychological trauma, you need it, even if it is just to go and pick up the dead animals. But then there's also the fact that there are many people that might be needed to go and recover the dead people. That's another speciality. No. We must never forget, we need morgues during times of disasters. And even if there are temporary morgues, we need people that are capable of dealing with the deceased in a respectful manner. Then we've got other aspects like general care and comfort. So, Mom, listen to me. You've got a family of 5 who are all grown up. You've learned certain skills where now all of a sudden we are presented with children that are in need but don't have any injuries. We need to gather these children. We need to set up a creche, even if it's a 2-hour creche or child's playpen or whatever the case might be. Mom, you need it. Dad, here's another thing for you. During times of a disaster, you're going to get people that are going to go out there. They're going to start looting. They're going to start stealing. You, along with the private security service providers, can actually step in and start providing security assistance. But here's another aspect. I've said now you can drive at 75 people from a disaster to an evacuation center. An evacuation shelter, at least, could in actual fact be set up 10 kilometers away. Guys, those shelters need male presence. They need that male authority in the area. But the women are also needed, along with the males. You need to record details of people entering that shelter. We need to start looking at repatriation in some cases. We need to start looking at tracking and tracing the family members. We need to start looking as a result of those evacuation centers and shelters where the family members are. We also need to be able to deal with family members outside of the country in other provinces that are looking for their loved ones who they think might be involved. There's a lot of things that have got to be done. I mean, if you take a look at that Boksburg blast, what chaos. That was absolute chaos. Sorry, guys. I'm telling you straight, that was absolute chaos. There was no incident commander.
Very right. Yes, you're right.
Everybody ran around and did their own thing. And it took days and days before people were actually reunited with families, or families were notified that there were injuries or that they had lost loved ones. Could it have been done differently? Absolutely. However, I do need to say, well done to everybody who got involved. You know, not everybody that was injured lost their lives. And I've always maintained, if you can save one life, then you've done a good thing. So we got two sides to the Boksburg tanker blast. Well done to everybody that did get involved. Could it have been done differently? Absolutely. And I think that is the most important part of that event that must be considered. And that is, what are you as a community taking away as a learning event from that situation? Look at how many people. Then, of course, look at what happened with regards to the donations. That was even worse. And then there was all the accusations made and the posts made and statements made about scamming and so it went on. One also needs to look at that side of the volunteer structure and the correct way within which it should be done, how it should be done. And not everybody needs to run in and do things the way that, not only this one, but Knysna fires is another one as well. The KZN unrest in 2021. The Knysna fires of 2017. These are all things that we need to learn from. So animal rescue. Then we got the care and comfort, looking after the children, bringing the children together. I must tell you something now. Even during our water outages, very seldom do I see communities actually standing up, Boksburg included, and saying, listen, guys, you guys haven't had water for 4 days or 5 days. Does anybody need water? Can I step up and maybe we through the admins, can we do it privately? I'll get your address and I can bring you water. I got the problem out this side of town as well. Here's another line of thought. You're 4 days without water. Listen, guys, can I bring you water? Can maybe one of the private security service providers step up and not only provide me as an individual security in collecting and containers and, you know, going and getting water from somebody who has got running potable water and taking it back, but also ensuring that we provide that resident some comfort and security in knowing that they're not being scammed, etc., that type of thing. You know, this water crisis, this electrical situation is borderline disaster at the moment. So even there, disaster relief CERT volunteers. As I said, we're not a first responder organization. But if you want to learn humanity during times of a simple thing as a water crisis, that's the time to step up to the plate. Am I shocking some of you? Well, I hope so. Then I'm achieving what I set out to achieve when I said, this meeting today is designed to explain why we need disaster relief CERT volunteers. Then, as I've said, evacuation center administration and assistance. We need to be able to record everybody. We need to do the tracing, repatriation. And these are just to name a few aspects of what is required with volunteers. Now I'm going to speak directly to the first responders. Not only those that are associated specifically with groups such as Boksburg 911, there's a couple of others in and around, not only to first aiders that are available on the street or to the private security service providers. I'm going to speak to the whole lot of you. It's quite simply this. When it comes to a disastrous event, a large-scale emergency or disaster, Each and every single one of you needs to know and understand your place. And I say that with the greatest of respect to each and every single one of you. Because if you step over your mark of your training level, of what you are designed to do, or you are getting involved in things that you've got no clue or no understanding, please understand that first and foremost, you place yourself at risk of losing your life. And the second part of that is you are going to affect your families. Now, most of you have got medical aids, for example, and life insurance policies. And during a large-scale event, during an ordinary emergency on a day-to-day basis, and during times of a disaster, you best read your medical aid small print and your life insurance policy small print very, very carefully. Because if you are accidentally killed or you lose your life out of something stupid that you do, I can assure you, your medical aid and your life insurance policy will not pay out. Go and read your policies carefully, people. Now, you might lose your life. You might lose a limb or two and become permanently disabled. Don't think you can do this and you're going to be covered, because you're not. And that is going to have an effect on your family. And you need to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Seriously, is it worth it? And this is why you need to know, first and foremost, that volunteers are definitely needed. There's no two ways about that. But secondly, you need to make sure that you are able to assist in the correct manner by either being a registered unit of volunteers or with a unit of volunteers, where the municipal authority usually does provide some sort of medical cover or even some benefits as a result of losing a life or becoming, in other words, they've got a public liability insurance behind them that will cover you. And in most instances, through the general volunteers who are registered with the DMCs, the same thing will apply. But spontaneous volunteers, forget it. I see somebody else is joining the meeting. And somebody is phoning me, so we're not going to answer that at this moment in time. Okay, so basically at the end of the day, the DMCs might be able to cover you with regards to, let me just see if this other person has come up. I don't see them as yet. No, don't see them as yet. These other policies might in actual fact be able to cover you. And that is something that you will have to make sure that you do join a unit of volunteers or become part of a general group of volunteers. In addition to that, spontaneous volunteers, and that goes for the private security service providers as well. You know, you guys are employed, and to the employers of the private security service providers, I think you guys need to make sure you've actually got an ethical responsibility to make sure that your security personnel are covered in times of large-scale emergencies and in times of disasters as well. Don't get caught short. You know, I think various businesses will, in actual fact, set up different medical aid schemes, different life insurance policies, different public liability capabilities and functionality for their particular staff. So there's a couple of things that you need to take into account. And I think in closing, the one thing that we also need to consider is that proper communications is made available between people and between provinces, well, that's where the radio amateurs would come in, but between municipalities as well, both on the community level as well as on the governmental levels. I think that basically covers it in essence. As you can see on the bottom of the screen there, I've still got, are you trying to assist your local community in times of a disaster? A lot of this training can be done via Zoom. A lot of this training can be done through desktop workshops, which is always the preferred way of doing it. However, there are times that exercises, boots on the ground does become a necessity. Therefore, we need to have a look at how do we become effective within our local community. So what I've done is I'm going to stop the screen sharing now. Basically, what we've done as the board of directors, John, Stephen, and myself, we are looking for a minimum of 10 volunteers. Initially, we were saying per suburb, purely to get started, but depending on the size of the suburb, for example, Constantia Kloof, 4,500 population, whereas if we cross over on Deckers Road into Florida, 35,000 for the population. So a lot of it will, in actual fact, depend on the size of the areas, but we need teams of 10 people. Why 10? Well, 2 for communications as base stations within a specific geographical area, and then the other 8 people that will be able to go out and undertake the disaster area damage assessment and report back. And then once that assessment is done, then of course those 8 that are trained in first aid and fire, they can then maybe start getting involved in treating patients up to the level of training whilst they await the professional services, that type of thing. So if you look at it, 10 people is a very small team. However, even there, as 2 people are definitely out of the mix completely, you've only got 8 people that are available, boots on the ground. To move 1 person safely, you need 4 people. So on any incident in any street, if you've got somebody lying on a street and you need to move them maybe to the end of the street where it is blocked off and carry them over the rubble in order to get them to an ambulance, you can only move 2 people at a time. What am I saying? 10 is not enough. I'm serious. We need a lot of volunteers. We need males, young males, healthy males, old males, not so healthy. We need females. We need everybody. And on that basis, my appeal to the community is start registering as volunteers and then just sit there and wait. We don't need to do any communications for now. Currently, we are 85 odd volunteers, mainly in the Johannesburg area. We've got Cape Town, Free State, Potch. I've got a couple of people out in Boksburg. Actually, John is in Benoni. And Nigel, we've got a couple of people as well, not many. But we need to grow the teams. And the way things are going, just on your water issues at the moment, I want to tell you that Boksburg, that East Rand area needs a bit of help, as does Johannesburg. So my appeal to you, share the video, which will be made available on YouTube. I will actually, if you just type in disaster relief CERT in the YouTube search, you'll probably find it. And you can share that with the other community members, encourage other community members to register. And you can register on www.disasterrelief.org.za. So it's disaster relief CERT.org.za, but I'll put it up on screen here as well. And from there, my telephone number will also be on screen. As community members, you're more than welcome to private message me, and I can get you up onto other info groups or whatever the case might be. So that being said, Tish, thank you for coming up. As I said at the beginning, Usually I do these talks, even if I do it for one, I know that it can reach out to many others from that one, and we can make it available and people can go and watch it. I don't know if there's any other questions. There's 5 minutes to the end of the session. Are there any questions from your side, Tish, that I can basically cover?
So, Chad, just apologies, the wind is quite terrible where I am. Obviously, Boxbook 911 has been set up in such a way that we've got, let me just get out of the wind, but it's been set up in such a way that obviously we have all these elements that you've mentioned of people that you might need in certain areas that have been set up already in those respective areas. So, such as the security side, containing the scenes, communications. We've got different people that assist with that. First responders, obviously, that's spoken for itself. So, within our community of people that we have, and I'm just talking about throughout the members, I'm sure if we share this out to them to get them involved, we'll definitely be able to put an organization together that will be willing and able to assist. So, I think we've got a bit of the structure already there in place. And this will definitely be shared out to the team so that they can be filled in with all the information of what is expected if we do face something like the explosion again or something in that line. To get people involved, because it's like you say, there are people left behind that just don't feel where do they fit in. And that is of importance where somebody just wants to get involved or just, run a radio and clear roads for us. Those kind of things, it's very important to grab the organization and get them together to assist wherever they can, That's why we've started Boxbook 911, is to get everything together in one space. And then in terms of liability, that's something that I want to ask you. Is that covered, like your AfriForums and your CPF? They should have their coverings already. Am I right?
Well, I think any organization needs to either have it on an organizational level, or alternatively, the individuals must cover it in their personal capacity.
Yes.
Even so, I mean, that then also means various organizations normally charge a membership fee. To take out public liability for let's say 1,000 volunteers at R1 million cover for, let's say, a potential of 10. That could, in actual fact, I don't know, to be quite honest, but that could be costing the organization several thousands of rands per year. And then it actually starts throwing people out of the mix completely, because, it's like training. To have decent level 3 first aid training, you're not going to get it for less than probably two. And if you are, then it's a fly by night. It's not a proper training facility. I'm sorry, I've got to be quite open and honest on that side of it. And that's because of the fact that I know what it costs to set up training centers, etc. So on that aspect, when it comes to public liability, organizations need to seriously have a look at it. And of course, they will have to find the best possible solution. But as long as the membership or those involved within the organization are aware, for example, on the disaster relief CERT aspect, because we're not a first responder organization, then it's a different ballgame altogether. We don't need to have public liability cover there at all. However, during times of a disaster, even if we had public liability cover at that moment in time, it still falls under that exception rule, whichever way. So again, people that are getting involved, well, either they're going to be injured as a result of the incident, or alternatively, they're going to have to look at covering themselves. When I was talking about the legal liability, specifically from this private security service providers perspective, those companies definitely need to look at it because the security personnel are not really covered in terms of disasters, generally speaking. So I'm just pointing that one out. I'm having a similar discussion with the guys this side as well. Hopefully that answers your question with less than a minute to go, Tish.
Yes, certainly it does. Thank you, Chad. 100%. We have extra trained up first responders as well. We're just waiting, obviously, for their exam results. But yeah, I'm actually looking forward to, even building the organization more than what it is now, together with CERT, and just stand together and make a difference.
Well, I believe that the two can help each other. Out of the people that come forward from CERT on that side of town can be made aware of your grouping and, the other family members joining that way. So a bit of cross-pollination, number one, and then number. All right. So we definitely did, in actual fact, time out on that. So I'll just do a closing to the video. Tish, I'd like to thank you for joining. I'm sure if you've got questions, you'll pop it to me on WhatsApp. But what I was saying is that, any members that are signing up with Disaster Relief CERT that are based out your side, their family members who aren't on the CERT level can, in actual fact, look at joining and growing your groups and what you are doing that side as well. And then, of course, as I said in the beginning, I'm not looking at taking any of volunteers away from any other organizations. However, where they do have family members that would like to get involved, then I encourage everybody, like within the Boksburg 911 grouping, for the other family members to maybe sign up and get involved. And I think that even there, that being said, during times of a disaster, one needs to understand that, where you've got a group, a first responder group that is there specifically for undertaking first response activities on a normal basis, that those activities that occur during a normal day-to-day aspect do not actually fall away during times of a disaster, because a disaster will only affect a certain area. The rest of the area, those first responders would still have to go out there. So in that aspect, it also doesn't make sense to say, well, look, I'm a member of such and such a group and I'll become a member of CERT, and then you tied up on the CERT side and then the other side is now neglected and that type of thing. And that's why I like to look at it that we in actual fact are putting this in a much broader aspect, where you've got this group that is concentrating on what they should be concentrating on. And then you got this group on this side, or grouping on this side. And it could be various groupings, whether you're another organization, CERT or otherwise, it doesn't make a difference. You are concentrating on this and this only. However, during the time of that large-scale emergency or disaster, there will be some integration, but this should not just fall in here and leave this side open. That's the point I think I need to cover in opening. So for those that are watching the video, thank you very much for taking the time to watch it. It's going to work out to probably about 90 minutes, an hour and a half. But I'd like to thank you for taking the time. And Tish, thanks for stepping in. As I said, Bobby and I have chatted about this on a regular basis as well, but I think it also gives you a bit of additional insight. So on that basis, again, in closing, thanks very much. I'm out of here. Cheers.